stage here with the famous Kyla Zhao, and you're actually a student here from Stanford, isn't that right?
Yeah, I've never been inside this building before. I would go to the building right opposite all the time because it has this small convenience store where I would get all my snacks. But yeah, first time stepping inside Paul Brest.
Okay, fantastic. So welcome to the new part of campus that you've attended. If I'm not mistaken, you're famous for writing, but you're also famous as a chess champion, like a chess player, right? You're a chess master. So what got you inspired in chess in the first place? What was the origin of how you even discovered the game?
I started learning chess when I was 6. My grandfather taught me the game, and I just had a very competitive spirit and really wanted to beat him. And so I would make him play with me for hours every day till I got my first win. But it was only many years later that I found out that he would just let me win deliberately so he didn't have to play for like 10 hours.
Okay, that's very sweet and very smart of him too.
Yeah.
But then you became better and better at it though, right? To the point where you actually became competitive.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Tell me about that road and what was the initial journey up into that road of becoming a competitor?
I moved from chess to competitive chess pretty naturally because I joined this elementary school that had a really strong chess team, and they had a really strong chess culture. So even when you walk into the cafeteria, there would be chess boards everywhere. And so it became quite natural for me to just start participating in tournaments and competitions. And then that's just kind of how it went on. I don't think there was ever a conscious moment when I was like, okay, I really want to become a competitor. It just happened.
So you just basically got that gift of just getting better and better. Now, you told me at one point, though, this became, how can I put this? People started criticizing you for being a woman playing chess.
Yeah, it was never anything explicit. Like, no one would be coming to my face and telling me, oh, you suck because you're a girl, or you're not supposed to play chess because you're a girl. But it would come true in very subtle, insidious moments. So for instance, if I was playing against a boy and he lost to me, all of his friends would tease him and be like, how can you lose to a girl? Like, you're supposed to win. Or when I'm playing against a boy and his friend would tell him, oh, like, easy win, it's a girl. And so those little moments that on its own seem so, so okay, but when you add them together, it kind of made me start questioning my place in the chess world. It made me start to question if I deserve to play chess, if this was a place that I could occupy space in.
How did that make you feel in terms of how your gender and what you love to do mesh together, if even it could?
That's a really good question. There's this really common stereotype of girls and women in chess, and maybe in all domains, that we are very emotional, that we let emotions rule us. So I remember when I first started feeling very attacked by these stereotypes and gender biases, I wondered if it was me overreacting, if it was just me being too emotional to that, and if maybe I could just be strong enough to handle it on my own, which is why I never told anyone about how I was feeling. I didn't tell my parents, didn't tell my coaches, didn't tell my teammates. I thought I could handle it, but I think it just came to a point when I could no longer handle it by myself, and that's why I had to take a step back from chess, and I had to quit chess.
So if you're okay, comfortable sharing with us, what were some of the manifestations that started to happen psychologically and physically as you started getting this feeling about chess and your place in the world with it?
I started developing a lot of performance anxiety. I think because I wanted to justify my place in chess so much, because I wanted to prove to all the boys that I could be just as good as them when it comes to chess, I started fixating a lot on winning medals and trophies and getting good results. And every time I finished on the podium, it was like, okay, I proved something. But every time I finished off the podium, it was like the world collapsed. I felt like this is just feeding into what they were all saying, that I wasn't good enough. And so as my focus in chess went from enjoying the game, playing purely for love of the game, to playing for results, I began to develop this mental block against chess. I was afraid of competing because if I compete, it might mean that I would lose. And every time I sat down on a chessboard, my heart would start beating so fast, I would break out into cold sweat, I would feel like I couldn't breathe. And yeah, that's when I realized that it was getting unhealthy, it was getting unsustainable, and this isn't how I should be feeling for an activity that I'm supposed to love.
So you're saying that you went from, or if you can explain, did you even enjoy chess at this point anymore?
No, I don't think so. I think it just brought me so much fear. And every time I played chess, it just felt like I was opening myself up to the chance of failing.
Did you talk to anyone about this, like family or friends? Because by that time, I'm sure they identified you with chess, right? But did you tell them, hey, I'm not having a healthy relationship here anymore?
I didn't tell them because I didn't want to seem weak. I was raised in a culture where, there's no such thing as weakness. Like, you either handle it or you're not capable of doing it. And I thought that I was capable. I thought that I should prove that I'm capable. And so I didn't tell anyone, which in hindsight, I really regret. I think if I had told my coaches, they are amazing people. I think they would have probably given me advice inspired by their own experience. And I wouldn't have felt like I was going through all of that alone.
So how did you finally put an end to your chess career? Was it sudden, or did you taper it, or how did you finally say goodbye to it for at least the first time?
I graduated from middle school, and I decided that I wasn't going to continue chess in high school, so I switched to soccer, football.
Did that fill the gap?
It did, in a very different way, because it became like a team sport. So I never felt, it no longer felt like I was handling everything by myself. It no longer felt like I was going through the stress of playing and winning by myself. I was part of something bigger.
Okay. Now, from middle school, how did you find your way from Singapore, right?
Yeah.
Now, how did you find your way from middle school Singapore all the way out here to Stanford University in California?
I always knew that I wanted to study abroad, and I was very fascinated by California. I think, back then, like, to me, California was Hollywood. It didn't matter, like, Northern, Southern California. I had no distinction. I was just like, yeah, I'm going to go to a place where there's palm trees and, like, sun and a beach everywhere. And so when I got accepted into Stanford, it was just like, okay, well, I have to go. And I came here, and I was like, well, it's not Hollywood, but yeah.
Close enough, right?
Yeah, close enough.
So now you're a writer, and I know you're working in tech, but you're transitioning into like professional writing at this point. Did you know this is something you want to do early on, or what did you want to do when you were coming here to Stanford? What were you studying for? What was your major?
My undergrad was psychology, and I did my master's degree in media studies. And I never thought that I would become a writer. Like, I used to write for magazines, and I would write school essays and research papers, but writing 2,000 words about something that you could do research on, it's very different from writing 100,000 words on an idea that you have to conceive. It really felt more like running a marathon where you have to keep yourself motivated for years and years that it takes to produce a book.
What were some of your inspirations from writing in early on?
Writing early, okay, this is funny. So I never thought I would become a writer, but when I was younger, I would write like short stories and so on. And when I went back home to Singapore last year, I was like opening my archives and I was reading the things I used to write when I was just like a preteen. And I realized that in all those short stories, the main character was always a girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, which doesn't even make sense because I grew up in Singapore. There were no white girls around me. But because I was consuming, the Hollywood movies and all the books that the American media was throwing at me, I internalized that only someone who looked like that, someone who was white, could be a main character. And for the longest time, I thought that Asian girls like myself, we could never be the stars. We would always have to be on the sidelines of fulfilling the stereotype of a nerdy girl, but we could never be the main character.
So how did that concept of being blonde and Caucasian and only that qualifies as being the main star, how did that clash when you first came out here to California where there were a lot of blonde and blue-eyed girls? Did that reinforce that?
Yeah, but there were also a lot of Asians who looked like me, so that was very heartwarming. I think at that point in time, I had probably already internalized a very Eurocentric ideal of beauty, and it was actually after I came to Stanford, after people started talking more about ethnicity and race, that I became more aware of these ideals that I had to unpack. Back in Singapore, because it's a little more of a monolith where the predominant ethnicity was Asian, so I never really had the chance to think too deeply about race and ethnicity. And it was only after I started university that I became exposed to a broader variety, and I began thinking about how it related to my own life and to myself.
So that's interesting. When you were living in a predominantly Asian environment like Singapore, you didn't really focus that much on your ethnic and your cultural, but it wasn't until you came out here that became actually more apparent and more visible, right?
Yeah, because I came here alone. I didn't have any family around me. When I first came, I didn't have any friends. So I really needed something to hold on to, something to anchor myself. And so my own culture, my background, my ethnicity became something that became more salient to me.
Okay. Now, you were here during the pandemic, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
right? Okay. What was that like for you? And if I'm not mistaken, that might have been the genesis of your books, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So tell us about what pandemic was like out here for you. Especially, first of all, you came here on your own. You're looking for a community, and then boom, the pandemic hits.
Yeah.
So which basically isolates you now, right?
Uh-huh.
So what was that like?
Yeah, so when the pandemic broke out, like everyone, like the school shut down and we all had to go back home to be with our families. But it was also a time when every country was shutting down its borders, and I was afraid that if I left the country, I wouldn't be able to come back for school and for internships and so on. And so ultimately, I decided to stay put in California. I spent most of 2020 living by myself in this small studio in San Jose. And as a result, I was very lonely and I was very homesick. And I also had a lot of these thoughts and emotions churning within me from witnessing the rising anti-Asian racism. And with no one else to talk to, I had to channel all of that into a more healthy outlet. And that's how I started writing.
What was your first piece of work that you started working on during the pandemic?
The first thing I started working on eventually became my first published novel, The Fraud Squad. It's set in Singapore, and setting it in my home country was my way of staying connected to home at a time when I didn't know when I could go back again.
So was that character, assume an Asian girl?
Yes, definitely.
So what made you finally realize, okay, Asian should be the main character now?
Yeah, I think it was from looking up all the news and all the social media at that time when, the Asian community, the Asian diaspora was being portrayed in such a negative, criminal light, where we were being blamed for everything, for the pandemic, for the loss of jobs. And I just wanted to see the Asian community be portrayed in a more positive, uplifting, vibrant manner. And so I decided to start creating that.
Okay, that's fantastic. So what was that story about?
Okay, so I think just now I mentioned that I used to work in fashion, and when I was working in fashion, I would come up pretty close with socialites in high society, and I thought that was a very fascinating ecosystem. I studied psychology, so I'm always interested in seeing how this group identity work and how people can develop a very cult-like identity sometimes. And so high society amplifies that, and so my first book, it's set in Singapore high society.
So did you only write one book during pandemic, or did you write more than that?
I wrote 2 books. I started writing The Fraud Squad in June 2020, and then I started writing May the Best Player Win, my 3rd book, and my most recently published novel in November that year. And so it only came out in September 2024, so it took me 4 years, basically, to work on my 3rd novel.
So what was your plan before writing came into your life? You were planning working in tech, right?
I don't know if I really planned it or if I was just going to let myself get swept up in it, because I go to Stanford, we're in the heart of Silicon Valley. Everyone around me was going to go into tech, so it seemed more like might as well.
So that's something you just fell into then, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. What's the difference between becoming your own writer? What are the core differences becoming your own writer and having to work in tech? Like, what's the mindset you have to switch into?
I think of writing or running my own author career as almost like running a startup. I have to really promote myself. I have to promote my product. And even though I have an amazing publishing team, at the end of the day, it is my name on the book cover. So the concept of extreme ownership, I've never felt it as much as when I was working on my books. You truly have to take ownership over every success, every failure. If something doesn't work out, you don't have anyone else to look to. It's just myself.
Was there anything you needed to do to get into that mindset, be like, I'm going to take this risk of this safe, secure job, and then I'm going to go out there and then I'm going to start putting myself out, not just my ideas, but learning my name out there. Is there a mindset you have to change in there?
I will say that I'm lucky in the sense that I still work a full-time tech job, and I don't think I'll ever become a full-time author. People have asked me that, and I don't think I ever will. I enjoy writing a lot more when it's not my rice bowl or my only source of livelihood. I think if I were to depend on it for my livelihood, I would feel more tempted to write what I know will be popular and what I think will sell well, rather than what I'm genuinely interested and fascinated by.
So if I'm not mistaken, you're also now, because of the direction of some of your writing now also has a mission of representation now in there, right?
Yeah, I don't think I set it out for it to be a mission, but it's more that I know that my main characters will be Asian, and I wanted to portray Asian girls and Asian women in very different settings, because growing up, I felt like the most famous examples of Asian American literature were mostly about immigrant stories, about multi-generational trauma in a sense. And I think those are very important. I loved those books when I was growing up, but I also wanted to see people like myself, women and girls like myself, being represented in a whole variety of settings instead of being pigeonholed into a specific kind of narrative.
So what are some of the missions or the stories that you're hoping that, or no, I would say the message you're hoping your stories will convey and really inspire, say, a lot of the young Asian American girls growing up and seeing your characters and hopefully what seeds you hope plant in their heads?
I hope that my readers feel more seen and represented in a whole variety of settings, that they realize that any path is possible for them, that yes, you can be really good at school, you can be a nerd, whatever, but you can also be like a dancer, you could be a chess player, you could be a socialite, you could be like a fashionista in Silicon Valley. There are so many different paths, like truly the sky's your limit.
What is some advice you would give people out there who are really on the fence right now, whether or not they have an idea, but they don't have maybe the courage or the confidence yet to take it on?
Well, I guess you just have to ask yourself, like, what's stopping you? If the only thing stopping you is fear, then there's a really easy solution, which is to just do it. If there is another circumstantial factor stopping you, then in that case, that's another conversation.
What do you want to see yourself doing with your writing? Is it just, are you going to write books, or are you also looking at potential movie deals? Because we've seen a lot of Asian representation go from books into movies now too. Is that something that you're also like looking at potentially in the future?
Yeah, all I can say is that I think my film agent will kill me if I reveal anything about that, and hopefully that's a satisfactory answer.
Okay, so you guys definitely get her autograph now before she becomes too famous to even be here. Okay. So I'm curious, what are some storylines that you're thinking about in the future, if you're able to share? Because right now we see a lot of chess in there, but you think you're going to be writing mostly about Asian women and chess, or are you looking at other things you have always wanted to explore?
Okay, I'm actually really excited to tell you more about my next book, which comes out next year, because it kind of relates to one of the other speakers who will be speaking today. So my next book, well, okay, backtracking a little bit. In 2023, I visited Las Vegas, and I visited the Mafia Museum, which is not one of Vegas's most well-known attractions, but I visited it, and I loved it. And I became very fascinated by the Mafia. And I always thought to myself that, okay, I'm going to write a Mafia book one day. And so finally, one day, I decided to just do it. But I wanted to kind of, put it into like a more Asian setting. So it became a historical fiction set in San Francisco, Chinatown in the late 1940s about two rival Chinese gangs. And as part of my research, I started watching this show called Warrior. And so when I saw that Rich Ting was going to be speaking, I was like, my God, like it couldn't have worked out better.
Are you able to share some of the lessons you hope that book might be able to convey to readers, and on top of just being entertaining?
Well, this is my first time trying out historical fiction, and so I had to do a lot of research into that time period. And what I realized was that even though, the Asian community has gotten so much more acknowledgement and recognition in the past few decades, because the 1940s was truly a pretty terrible time. For the longest time, we weren't allowed to own any property outside of Chinatown. And so what you see is just everyone moving to Chinatown, and it became so dense and so overcrowded. And it's a pretty different scenario now, but at the same time, not a lot has changed as well. Like, we still have a pretty long way to go. So I think writing historical fiction and juxtaposing that against the contemporary books that I previously wrote was interesting.
Okay. I do have a question for you. Do you identify yourself as Singaporean, or do you identify yourself as Asian American?
Oh, good question. I always think that I'm Singaporean at heart. Like, that is home for me. But at the same time, I spent all of my adult years in California. I became an adult here. I became independent here. And so I think the place where you come into adulthood is always going to be a special place as well.
What are the differences in mentalities that you're seeing being an Asian American and being a Singaporean, or someone who was born and raised in Asia? Well, like, what are the big differences you see just from a a mindset point of view?
I think that the American public is more open to talking about mental health, which I think is really important for the Asian community because we tend to have a habit of keeping things bottled up to ourselves. Mental health and weaknesses isn't something that we really want to talk about. And like very truthfully, when I first came to Stanford and I heard about people getting depression and stuff, I never thought that it was valid. I probably shouldn't admit this, but I was brought up in a place where people just didn't believe in the idea of depression. The idea of going to a doctor for your mental health just wasn't even a thing. But after coming here and after seeing how openly people talked about it with no shame, and I was like, yeah, this is not something to be ashamed about. Just like physical health, mental health is just the other side of the same coin.
And that was important because that's what you were suffering from in Singapore during the chess time, right?
Yeah, by the time I didn't even realize I was suffering from that. I didn't have a name for it. I just thought, okay, I'm stressed out, but like that's it. Like people are stressed out about different things all the time, and I should be able to handle it by myself.
So has chess found a place in your life back again?
Yeah, I mean, I've always followed chess as a spectator, as a fan. I got to attend the World Chess Championship last year because I was invited to present my book, and I got to see, all the top players whom I've admired for like over a decade. So that was really exciting. I don't compete in chess anymore just because it's no longer the biggest passion of mine. There are other things that I want to spend my time exploring.
So, what are some of the things that you do outside of writing and chess now?
Well, I do Pilates. I think not because I really enjoy it, but because I know I should work out, and Pilates is like the gentlest form of exercise I could think of. I've gotten really into contemporary art. This sounds so pretentious, but I have, because I started taking this class at Stanford Business School, and it's called the Business of Art. And so I think it's really interesting to learn more about why certain artworks sell for $80 million, or why something that looks like a kindergarten nerd could have created it is selling for like millions. So yeah, I think it's interesting learning about the ecosystem, and now I kind of want to write a novel set in the art world.
I was going to say, that sounds like another subject matter you can write about, right?
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
Are you going to write about a story with your time here at Stanford, do you think?
Oh gosh, maybe, but maybe not, because it might come across as too autobiographical.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So, how do you see yourself right now in terms of where you want to work and live? Do you want to stay more or less in, I guess, America and see where this particular new avenue is going with you, or do you think you're going to go back to Singapore eventually someday?
I think I'll at least spend the next couple of years in America. I feel like there's still a lot that I want to do here, so I'm not going to be leaving in the foreseeable future. But as for what happens, I'm 26 right now. What happens when I turn 30? Like, who knows? What
are some of the steps, if you can give us, if people are now have an idea and they're already writing, but they don't know how to even talk to a publisher or even get eyeballs to preview it. What are the like if you have 5 steps, 5 basic steps any budding author should be doing?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, there are many different paths of publishing. You can go into indie publishing, which is when you work with like a smaller press, or you can self-publish on Amazon. That's becoming a really popular option. The one that I have knowledge of is traditional publishing, which is when your book gets published by one of the big 5 publishing houses based in New York. And to do that, for them to even look at your book, you need a literary agent. I think that's pretty common for all creative industries, like actors need agents, singers need agents, and so do authors. And the process of getting an agent is just really cold emailing. Like you send your manuscript out to different agencies. You hope that someone will love your work enough to want to sign you as a client, because they don't start making money until you start making money. So they will only sign clients and books that they are confident they can sell to a publisher. And then once you get an agent, you work with your agent to identify the publishers that you want your book to get published by. And then you send it out to different publishers, and then it's just a waiting game and a praying game.
A praying game.
Yeah.
Okay. That part I believe. And what are some things that you would say are do's and don'ts for budding authors?
Yeah, the do's is to definitely get feedback. I think at some point I felt very precious about my work. I was like, gosh, I can't show this to anyone, because what if someone steals my idea? But truthfully, at this point, there's no original ideas in the world. Every book is inspired by books that came before it. And even if two people have the same idea, the way they execute it and the way they approach it is so, so different. Like I could give the same prompt to all of us in this room, and we're going to come up with 50 different stories and 50 different approaches. So don't be precious about it, and don't be afraid of showing your book to other people. I was like, my gosh, what if they judge my book? Like, I don't want my friends to see it. But if you want to publish a book, you're going to have to get used to the idea that people will see it. So don't be afraid to share it and get feedback. Feedback is so, so important. I think we all have a blind spot when it comes to the things we have created. No one wants to call their own baby ugly, which is why you need to ask a friend to tell you, oh, like, how can my baby be better? Like, how could it become more attractive? What do you like about it? But what more do you want to see?
And what is a don't?
Oh, a don't, huh? Honestly, I don't think there's any prescriptive rule when it comes to writing. I know sometimes books are like, okay, you should always do this in writing, or you should never do this. There's no such thing as always and never. You can twist the rules to make it fit your book and your style.
What do you hope to do with Asian American representation now? One of my final questions. Going forward, like, what is the mission you really hope? I know you want girls to be, or is it just girls or boys that you also want to inspire?
Well, I'm more comfortable writing about girls.
Oh, no. Okay, tell me.
I think that ethnicity and gender intersect in very interesting ways. The way that Asian men and the way Asian women are perceived, it's similar but also quite different. Mm-hmm. And I'm more familiar with the experience of an Asian woman, an Asian woman in tech, an Asian woman in the corporate space, an Asian woman in fashion. I think that the identity can manifest itself and be received in very different ways. So I want to write more about that, which is why if you were to look at my books, they seem all over the place in a way. Like my first book is set in high society, my second book is set in Silicon Valley, my most recent book is set in the world of competitive chess, my next book is set in the world of Chinese gangs in the 1940s. So they all seem very different, but that's just different ways of me to explore the same concept.
So you're basically like, you're writing about all different facets, but you also have had experience in all of these too, right?
Yeah, except for the one about the mafia.
The mafia. Awesome. Any last words of wisdom that you want to give people in terms of their identity, their place, their mission, or even their mental health?
Yeah, well, I will say you might feel like you're not good enough to do something, and that's a very normal feeling. I felt a very strong sense of imposter syndrome that I was asked to be speaking and to be the first speaker. I didn't think I would get a book published. When my book got published, I was like, wow, this is not good at all. Like, no one's ever going to read it. No one should read it. But, then I realized that, no, like, people do love it. Like, you're going to find your readers. And even if your book, like, impacts just one person, if the work that you do impacts one person, like, that is so meaningful.
So your message basically just don't get out of your own head. Don't get out of your own way and just let it happen.
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons why your dream might never come true, why your dream might never be realized, but you should never let yourself be the reason why your dream cannot come true.
Was this something that you were able to overcome during the pandemic, or is it something that you just grew into?
I'll be honest and say that I never thought that I would be getting published. I didn't think that a non-American could be published in America. And so because of that, I didn't really do a lot of research into the publishing process. I didn't look up the statistics and anything. And I think that really helped me, that blind courage. Because if I had known how difficult it was, I don't think I would have even dared to try. I don't think that it could have happened to me. And so I'm glad that I didn't close the door or like slam the door shut on myself, that I was willing to let myself try something because I didn't know the concept of failing for that. So yeah, like don't let the fear of failure stop you.
Yeah, that's pretty much almost what you said in the interview is if you think of a reason why, you'll think of a million reasons why you shouldn't be doing it, right?
Yeah.
But if you just do it and you have no idea what the odds are,
yeah.
Right? That's actually better, right?
Because only if you try do you even have the slightest chance of success. If you don't try at all, there's just zero chance of success.
All right. Well, I would like to thank you for coming on stage with us. Thank you so much, Kyla.
Thank you.